we just mentioned before that break, I don't know, would you call it a new tone? It's certainly maybe a shift of tone, a hardening of tone on the part of some of those around Donald Trump since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Everything points to coming down very hard on opponents and critics and perceived enemies, what they say as well as what they do. I mean, you've been watching that very closely. Give us your impressions of what's been going on.
Yeah, so I think there was a period just following the assassination of Charlie Kirk last week where we weren't necessarily sure which way the administration would go in responding to it. And you did hear from Trump very, very clear that he wanted the response to this to be non-violent from his reporters. You did hear from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for example, on Sunday at the memorial in D.C. that I went to, around wanting to honour the memory of Charlie by recognising that something that he did was debate with those on the other side of the aisle. Now, at the same time, we have heard from Donald Trump about the left, the radical left, who he's called vicious, and that has been part of his language in recent days. And then we had J.D. Vance yesterday, the vice president, who hosted a special edition of the Charlie Kirk Show, his podcast, and had leading figures from the Trump administration who were passing through and being interviewed about Charlie's legacy. And Stephen Miller, who is the architect of Trump's sweeping immigration agenda, kind of expert on domestic policy for President Trump, and one of his closest aides, was featured on that, and he was very open. He spoke about a vast domestic terror movement that he thought they needed to destroy in Charlie's name, and he promised to devote the full scope of resources from the federal government and its agencies towards tackling that. We now have heard that Trump is launching a $15 billion defamation and libel lawsuit against the New York Times. He's called it the mouthpiece for the radical left Democrat Party. We read in the Washington Post as well that there are plans underway to look at the tax-exempt status of some organizations that are seen to be promoting hate or funding these anti-conservative causes and resisting deportation efforts as some examples. And we heard from Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who said on Monday, there's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society. And so I think kind of cumulatively, all of those things that I've just mentioned suggest that there is going to be a very, very forthright response from the Trump administration to the assassination of Charlie Kirk and to what they feel is a certain section of the left who are more apologetic towards political violence and more tolerant of it. And Vance was citing polling yesterday suggesting that among the very left wing, at least, there is perhaps some evidence that that is true. And they are, as a result, going after many of these organizations. And I think in the next few days, we will see plenty more information on what they plan to do in detail.
Yeah. Let's just listen back. You mentioned Pam Bondi's the U.S. Deputy, she's the Attorney General. This is what she said the other day.
There's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie in our society. We will absolutely target you, go after you if you are targeting anyone with hate speech, anything. And that's across the aisle.
And that's Pam Bondi. And you mentioned also Stephen Miller, who's one of the leading lights of the administration. He's Deputy Chief of Staff, but he's a very powerful man. Have a listen to his thoughts.
We are going to channel all of the anger that we have over the organized campaign that led to this assassination to uproot and dismantle these terrorist networks. The organized doxing campaigns, the organized riots, the organized street violence, the organized campaigns of dehumanization, vilification, posting people's addresses, combining that with messaging that's designed to trigger and incite violence, and the actual organized cells that carry out and facilitate the violence. It is a vast domestic terror movement. And with God as my witness, we are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks and make America safe again for the American people. It will happen, and we will do it in Charlie's name.
That's Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. And Lara, the concern among Trump's opponents is when he talks about threats, the definition of threats includes opponents, includes critics, includes those on the other side of the aisle who speak out against the course of the government.
Yeah, I mean, look, there will be complicated moments for the Trump administration in this agenda because, of course, they are often committed to being forthright free speech champions, and they will be walking this line. And I think it will not necessarily be simple for them, but it certainly is something that they are very, very determined to do. And I mean, I think Vance, I come back to him again, but he had said plenty on this topic yesterday, citing women when he had taken his children to Disneyland and his family on holiday who had been shouting at his children and and saying very awful things to his children about that as one of the experiences that he's felt that has indicated to him that there is a certain section of the left that he thinks needs to be cracked down on. And I think anecdotes, Stephen Miller offered some as well, like that will be plentiful in the days to come when they're looking at exactly what they're going to do. I think the specifics of it will be really interesting because obviously we've heard the language, we've heard the rhetoric, and we've heard the promises, but we don't actually yet know beyond reports that they might be looking at tax exempt status for some of these organizations. Of course, lawsuits are another mechanism that the administration might use, but we're not totally sure yet, given they've promised the full weight of this administration into tackling it, exactly what the specific measures will be. And that's when I think we'll be able to get a closer idea of what it will look like.
Rachel and Tim.
I think we need to just call out how distressing this is. And firstly, the sort of distinction between free speech and hate speech, that is not something that you have heard the right in America talk about prior to this at all. It's been free speech no matter what. There was virtually no condemnation from many of these figures when, for example, Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked about the attempted kidnapping of Gretchen, I forget her surname, the governor, about the firebombs that Democratic politicians have received through the mail. And that's before you even get to January the 6th and the riots and the attempt to overthrow US democracy. I think it is absolutely right to try and condemn the glorification of violence, but that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing people who are saying the assassination of Charlie Kirk was entirely wrong and abhorrent, but equally he said some very toxic things that were have contributed to a climate of polarization in the US that sadly makes political violence more likely. You're seeing comments like that lead to people, American citizens, being fired. You're seeing Republican officials calling for people to basically snitch on posts that they see as being problematic and to try and get these people to lose their jobs or lose their funding or lose their licenses or whatever. It is incredibly hypocritical, and it is also it has all of the hallmarks of something that has been thought about and coordinated for some time, in the sense of how do we make sure that criticism of the Republican right and Donald Trump is suddenly made illegal. Well, now they've got the perfect excuse, and I think we shouldn't be afraid to call that out.
Jim.
Wow. In contrast to Rachel, I don't think it has at all the appearance of something that's been put together over a long time. It has the appearance of something being put together incredibly quickly and thoughtlessly. And I had quite a bit of contact with Charlie Kirk. I never met him, but had quite a bit of, and was personally incredibly emotional last week and turned down, for example, the Today programme because I didn't think I would hold it together. I was very emotional about it. And why I think I was so emotional was because I really admired, Lara's referred to it, Charlie's willingness to go into the lion's den and talk to opponents and soak it up. He did say controversial things, you're absolutely right, but he wanted to listen to opponents, and he really did listen to them, and they listened to him. When Governor Newsom, the governor of California, recently launched his podcast where he's trying to talk to people across the divide, Charlie Kirk was his first guest, and it was a very adult conversation between two men. And if America does go down this road of, I think you do need, there is a lot of poisonous organisations out there. They probably should lose charitable status. Probably organisations in Britain that should lose charitable status. But if there's an overreaction, which there looks like there might be at this stage, I hope they'll row back from it. It would be an incredible dishonouring, actually, of Charlie Kirk, because that's not who he was. And, it's always a good lesson. Let the sun go down on your anger. And if in the anger, understandable anger at what was done to a good man last week by that assassin's bullet, if they pass legislation of the kind that I think they are at the moment, they will regret it. And
what are you referring to?
Legislation that moves well beyond removing the charitable status from sort of hateful organisations to actually closing organisations down, prosecuting people just because of what they say. That's where we're getting into trouble as a nation. That's what J.D. Vance has been objecting to, I think, about what Britain's been doing. So don't rush to legislate is a very good maxim in all situations, but I think particularly so at the moment.
I mean, Lara, whether what we're seeing now is a thought-through strategy or hastily the thought-through a strategy, it does look like a strategy, doesn't it? Because we've got pretty much every senior member of the Trump team speaking now very much from the same hymn sheet, using very similar phraseology about the need to crack down and saying, as Rachel said, that violence in American politics was the province of fanatics on the left. I mean, a 5-second reading of very recent American history tells you that's not the case.
I mean, yeah, I think that a number of Republicans have been very disturbed by polling, which does show more of an openness, and YouGov did a poll on this, among people on the who consider themselves very left-wing towards political violence than perhaps those who consider themselves very right-wing. And that is a basis on which they say that actually this, and Vance said this very explicitly yesterday, this isn't a both sides problem in his view. He says this is a problem, particularly with a certain section of the political left. And so they are going to make that distinction. And you have had plenty of, I mean, look, there's been a very big increase in political violence in the US. This is well documented. Reuters have done a big report on this. We know that this is something, especially since Donald Trump was elected, that we have seen an increase on. So clearly there is a problem with political violence here. And this is not, the atmosphere in DC at the moment is not one where everybody is agreeing on the basis of that by any stretch of the imagination at all. And so that's one of the reasons why, sorry, forgive me, I think people are quite apprehensive in some sections about the moves that are about to come.
One distinction I think certainly true in Britain, I don't know what Lara would say it was a distinction in America, is that a lot of people, and I'm going to simplify, but I think it's there's truth to it, is that a lot of people on the right look at people on the left and think they're just a bit stupid, they don't know how the country works. Much more the other way around, the left look at the right and think that people like me are bad people, that they think that the right are somehow immoral, and they think we're bad, we think they're stupid, to simplify. I wonder whether that distinction, you think, I know you've only been there a little while, Lara, but do you think there's a parallel in America to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have to say that I have been really struck, and John, I think I said this to you last week, by the response to Charlie Kirk's murder, and just speaking to people and feeling like there was a real absence of recognition of the humanity of people on the side of those that they disagree with politically, that there was a predisposition towards saying things that I do think in Britain we just would not say of our political opponents. And it has been the most striking thing about the last week, watching how some quarters have been genuinely comfortable, if not happy, online to see that somebody like Charlie Kirk has been brutally murdered. And that is something that I would like to think we wouldn't necessarily see in the UK. But I don't know what you guys think.
Can I just say that I do think that I think J.D. Vance's idea that it's a problem with the left because he's looked at polling is incredibly disingenuous if you look at the reality of actual incidents of actual real life political violence over the last couple of years. I listed a whole load of examples. It is fundamentally not the case to say that this is just a problem with the radical left. And I think that interpretation of Charlie Kirk's murder is being used as a pretext for a crackdown on any critics of the Trump administration that is really distressing and really disturbing. And this language like a vast domestic terror network, this idea that it was organised, there's no evidence for that whatsoever. There's not really any evidence so far from what we know that the suspect was some radical left-wing agitator. If you look at the evidence that we have, it's an incredibly confused political ideology, certainly radicalised, but not really fitting with any one or other political space. But it is being used as a pretext to crack down on anyone who says anything that is critical of the president and his allies, and people who claim to stand up for free speech shouldn't be afraid of saying that.
I think one thing that is worrying is you look at how fragile American democracy might be, and we should thank God that the assassin's bullet aimed at Donald Trump didn't kill him, because you imagine if a president or presidential candidate had been assassinated and the Republicans had won power on the back of it, what might have resulted. And you would hope that these advanced societies wouldn't be vulnerable to that sort of response, but I think they clearly are.
Can I say that everyone assumed that the attempted assassination on Donald Trump was the result of some radical left-wing progressive until it turned out that it wasn't, and then we stopped framing it in those terms. I think it's very risky to look at incidences of political violence that are very, very extreme and draw any conclusions about what other people in that wider political tribe might think or might be intending.